Hello and welcome. In this video we are going to be taking a quick practical look at how MVC works, and we're going to do that by creating an object of a model and sending that to the view from the controller. So let's have a look. These are the basic building blocks of how MVC works and how every MVC application will work. Of course they'll all be slightly different, but that is essentially the building blocks of MVC. So let's create a new project. We're going to be creating an ASP.NET web application using the .NET framework. So go ahead and click next. Make sure you're using the latest version of .NET as always, and then click create. Here obviously we're creating an MVC project, so ensure you select that template and click create. Visual Studio will go ahead and get our project ready for us. And there we have it. So let's start off by creating a controller. So right click controllers and click add controller. I'm going to go ahead and create an empty controller, so click add. In this example I'm going to base it around a student, so we're going to go ahead and create a student controller. Okay, let's click add. Okay, so we have our student controller, which is just a class that inherits from controller. We have our method, our action result method, our action method that returns an action result. And so what we want to do now is let's go ahead and create the model. I think that works best. So let's go to models, right click and click add class. And as you can probably guess, we're going to call this class student. And while I'm here, I'm going to add a few properties. If you type in prop tab, it's a little shortcut, a little quick code snippet. And if you want to be really quick, just copy and paste it a couple of times and then you have free properties. So let's go ahead and start off by creating the first property, and we're going to call it name. We're going to have the second property as age, and we're going to have the third property as course. And I think what I'll do, I'll change that to string, so that works. If you're not familiar with what this is just a get and set method, which will essentially allow somebody to create an object of this class and get the value and set the value. It's just a little quick way of creating a property without having to create methods to set and get. Okay, so let's go back to our controller class, so student controller. And now what I'm going to do is create the view. So we've got the controller and we've got the model. This is our model. It represents a student in our problem domain. And we've got three properties. So let's go back to controller. Right click on index, and here's a little shortcut. You can say add view. And now the reason I created the model first was because if you have your model, you can use a bit of a shortcut here. So you can click here, and we're going to go ahead and say details. So that's essentially going to be a template that it's going to create for us where it's getting the details of something, and we can specify here what that something is in the model. So because we created our model, we can select it. This is essentially just going to do some of the donkey work for us so that the view is already set up pretty much as we want it, and if it's not exactly as we want it, we can modify it. Nothing too interesting here. I mean, if you're wanting to create this as a partial view, then essentially it becomes a reusable component that you can use on other views. If you're used to web forms, it would be similar to what a web control used to be. And likewise here we've got another thing that's interesting, I suppose. Use a layout page. So if you want a consistent look and feel on your site, you can use a layout page. Otherwise, if you don't, you can get rid of that, and then obviously what you'll be doing is you'll have to define all of the HTML, so you know, the header and the body and all of those tags. But I think we'll go ahead and use the layout page. That seems reasonable. If you click here, you can go to views, shared, and this is where the layout file is. Okay, That's good. Let's click add. So this has created a view for us. So let's just have a look on the right hand side here. So we've got the student controller. In the model, we've got a student class, which is our model in this instance. And then if we go down here, we've got a view and an index view. So we've got a student folder under views, and then we've got an index view. So much like in the student controller, we've got a folder for student, and then we've got a view for index, and they all work together, as you can probably tell. I'll go into some of this in more detail in other videos, so be sure to check those out. But of course, this is just a quick practical example. So let's go ahead and take a look at that view. Now, don't actually need this at the bottom, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to simplify this slightly. Right, so what's important here is at the top, what we're specifying is the model. So in this instance, the model is student. So if we go to the student class, here is the namespace. So remember, a namespace is just a little bit like a folder, really. It's where we're going to store something. So in Web Application 22 models, we're going to store student. So if we flip back to our view, what we can see is we're just specifying where our model is. And what we're saying by setting the model at the top of this page is we are saying we are going to pass you an object, because in MVC there's a separation of concerns. And what that basically means in this particular instance is that from the code behind file, our control, we aren't able to directly interact with the view. The view is completely separate from the control. The only thing we can do is we can pass the view an object, and in this instance what we're going to do is we're going to pass it an object, which in this instance is student. And of course here viewbag.title just sets the title of the browser, and layout, that's obviously where our layout page is. And the rest of it is pretty much just standard HTML. So we've got a header 4 tag and HR. I might just get rid of that for simplicity. So you may not have seen these before. They should be used a lot more than they actually are. We've got a definition list. It's a little bit like a bullet point list, really, or an ordered list. But it's slightly better when you're going to have key and value pairs. So in this instance, what we've got is we've got a definition list. There's the start, there's the end. And here we've got a definition term and a definition. So we've got a term and a definition, a term and a definition. And if you have a look, we've got the first one is name. So this is why it was kind of good to create the model first, because by creating the model first, we was able to get this template automatically generated for us. Other than it saving a few minutes, there was no real reason to do that. You could have written it yourself if you really want to, but actually I always find it easier to start with a template, because then you can modify it. So what we're doing here is we're going to pass it a student, and here we've got model.name and model.name. And so the reason we've got it twice is because here we're using a HTML helper method for display name for. So essentially what that's going to do in the term, it's going to go ahead and display, in this instance, the name of the property. And here we've got display name for, here we've got display for, and this is actually going to go ahead and display the value, as you probably can guess. So here we're going to have a term, name, value, whatever we set it, term, age, and then the actual value for age, and the term is course, and then whatever value we set it to. So let's go ahead and have a look at what this browser, view looks like in a browser. A couple of ways we can do that. We can right click on the view and say view in a browser somewhere. There it is. We can do that. When it loads. Okay, and as you can probably guess, we haven't got any values because we haven't set any values yet. The other way to do this is to press Control F5. Now if you're in a view and you click on Control F5, it will essentially do the same thing. Okay, it will view that view in a browser. So now what we need to do is we need to actually pass an object. At the moment, the view You know, it's just simple HTML. I'll quickly show you where the layout is if you want. Let's have a look. Shared layout. Here's the layout. So essentially all of the header and the footer and all of these bits are stored in this file here. I'm not going to touch too much on this particular file because it's slightly outside the scope of this video, but essentially this is the HTML for the layout, and what we're looking at is a view, and that essentially gets rendered here where it says rendered body. Okay, so Control Tab, back to the view. So like I say, this view is taking a student, but we haven't set anything. Right, so let's go back to the controller. So here we have it, student controller, and we've got our action method. And what's happening is when we go to this URL, which is student index is returning a view. There's a bit of magic going on here, because actually you might be thinking, well, how does it know what view? Well, there's a little bit of magic going on in the background, because we're in the student controller and this is the index action method. MVC knows to look for within views for a student folder and an index view, but essentially this is what it's doing behind the scenes. It's actually just going ahead and returning that. So let me build that. Let's just make sure it still works. Let's hope so, and it does work. So essentially what it's doing is it's doing that, but it's a bit of a shortcut. So you can, if you wanted to return a different view that wasn't this one here, the index view of the student in the student folder, you could specify something else here. But because we might as well use the shortcut, because it makes the code look a little bit more readable, a little bit tidier. Although you could argue it's slightly more cryptic. Right, so what we're going to want to do is, the view obviously is expecting a student object, right? So let's go ahead and create one. So let's say student. Now I don't want a student controller. I want to say student and lowercase student equal to new. Now you might be thinking, why has this not come up? Well, the reason this hasn't come up is because we haven't imported the namespace at the top. So there's a couple of ways around that. We can actually pass in the namespace, which, let's have a look if we can get to models. Yeah, we can. So we can get to models.student. So that's how this controller will know what object, well, what class we're looking at. But that looks a bit ugly as far as I'm concerned. So let's get rid of that. Highlight over, and then just click on the first, click on that little tiny icon that pops up, right? And then click on using. And now, because we've imported the namespace models, and if we go back to our class, yeah, the same namespace, this is where this code lives, in that namespace. If we import that namespace into our controller, we can go ahead and use the class, okay? So student, I could say my student if you want, you can call it what you like, equal to new student, open and close round brackets. So now we just need to set the values, okay? So my student dot name equal to my student dot age equal to, let's say 22, and my student dot course equal to, I don't know, IT. How about that? Alright, so I missed the equal sign there, and let's put the name as the name of the channel, shall we? Saturday Night Coder. That looks good to me. Let's build it, and if we go ahead, Alt Tab back to our browser, if you click refresh, hopefully we're going to see some values. I did make a schoolboy error. I'm sure everyone watching this video noticed it. We did not pass the object to the view. Very simple. You just pass it to the view in the brackets. Simple as that. Let's build it again. Alt Tab back. Refresh by hitting F5. And fingers crossed, there we have it. I'm just going to increase the size of that just so you can see. There we have it. We've got the name, the age, and the course. While I'm here, let me just show you another way that we can create an object, okay? So student equal to new student, and then what we can do, this is like a bit of a shorthand way of creating an object. You can do it like this. Actually, what I'll do is let's copy that, and then you just separate it by a simple comma. Age equals 22, and then course equal to IT. It kind of just saves some repetition. Obviously we're going to need a semicolon. So I mean, it's up to you really. It's just a preference. What do you prefer the look of? This way or this way? Maybe tell me in the comment section below what you prefer. I tend to go with whatever one I feel like at the time, but I've started to use this style here a little bit more. So what we'll do, we'll get rid of that code, and we're going to have to return the new object. So copy that and paste it in there, because obviously our old object was called something different. Let's build it. Control Shift and B, Alt Tab, and click refresh, and it should look exactly the same. Just so you know that it is actually using the new object. Let's change the name, and as you can see, that has worked perfectly. Now if we go back to the view, which is here, we don't have to use these HTML helpers. Okay, when you're creating MVC applications, you're going to find that you're using these helpers probably quite a lot, but you don't have to use them. So as an example, if we wanted to put, let's get rid of the name of the student here. We're going to get rid of that. So let's just Control and save, Alt Tab. Let's just refresh that. Make sure it's gone, and it has gone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the name of the student here instead of the existing header 4 tag. And in fact, what I might do, actually I'll do that in a minute. So what you want to do to access the object or access the model, same difference, if you type the @ symbol and then uppercase MODEL, model, this is like a dynamic object. So you can access this object within your view, and essentially what will happen is this object will always be whatever you're passing through to it. So if we click on dot, you can see that we can actually access all of those properties that we create. So let's go ahead and select name. Let's save it, Control S, Alt Tab back, F5, and as you can see, we've got the name in a header tag. And you can change the HTML, so we can make that a header 1 tag if you really wanted to. Save it, refresh, and there you go. So I hope this helps. I try to make these videos as simple as possible, because actually I prefer it when things are explained in a simple way. Sometimes things can come across far too complicated. So I'm hoping that this video gives you a good example, a practical, quick example of how MVC works. So here we've seen a model, we've seen a view, and we've seen a controller, right? And we've seen how they can all how they all work together. So you know, we've seen, here's our model, a student. You know, a model is nothing more than a class or an object that represents your problem domain. So we've got ourselves a model here, we've got ourselves a controller here, and all the controller was doing was creating an object of our class, of our student class, and sending it to the view. And we've also seen that actually our view isn't actually that complicated. It's just HTML, and we're using the model that we created, and we're telling the view that this is the object we're passing through to it, and everything else is fairly simple and fits into place nicely, and we end up with a nice simple page as we've seen here. Now of course, if this was the real world and this wasn't an example, we'd be probably accessing a database or something to go ahead and get the details of someone, a record from a table, but this was just a quick example. So I hope it gives you an overview of how MVC works. If you've got any questions or suggestions, go ahead and leave those in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate a like on it, just so I know if this is the sort of content you guys want to see in the future. And likewise, I'm going to keep the content coming. I'm going to be creating more how-to videos and tutorials. So if you are new to programming and fancy seeing those videos, why not consider subscribing, and then you'll be able to watch all of the content that I put out. And with that said, until next time, take care everybody.